The Sino-Vietnamese War, a brief but intense conflict, took place in 1979 between the People's Republic of China and the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. This war was rooted in complex geopolitical dynamics, historical tensions, and immediate provocations. Although the conflict lasted less than a month, from February 17th to March 16th, its impacts were profound, influencing regional politics and the relationships between the involved countries for years to come. The origins of the Sino-Vietnamese War can be traced to several key factors. Historically, China and Vietnam had a long and complicated relationship, marked by periods of Chinese dominance and Vietnamese resistance. For centuries, Vietnam was a tributary state to China, but it fiercely defended its independence, resulting in a legacy of mutual suspicion and occasional conflict. In the modern era, both China and Vietnam emerged as communist states after their respective revolutions, which initially brought them closer together. However, ideological and strategic differences soon emerged. The Sino-Soviet split of the 1960s, which saw China and the Soviet Union become rivals despite their shared communist ideology, played a crucial role in these tensions. Vietnam, heavily reliant on Soviet support during its wars against French colonial forces and later the United States, aligned more closely with Moscow, while China viewed this alliance with suspicion. The immediate causes of the Sino-Vietnamese War involved a series of escalating disputes in the late 1970s. Following the end of the Vietnam War in 1975, Vietnam sought to consolidate its influence in Southeast Asia, particularly in Cambodia, where it opposed the Khmer Rouge regime, which was supported by China. In December 1978, Vietnam invaded Cambodia and overthrew the Khmer Rouge, establishing a pro-Vietnamese government. China viewed this as a significant threat to its strategic interests and a direct challenge to its influence in the region. Additionally, there were tensions related to the treatment of ethnic Chinese in Vietnam. As relations between the two countries deteriorated, Vietnam's government enacted policies that targeted the ethnic Chinese community, leading to mass emigrations and further straining bilateral relations. On February 17, 1979, China launched a large-scale invasion of northern Vietnam, claiming the action was to teach Vietnam a lesson for its hegemonic actions in Cambodia. The Chinese People's Liberation Army mobilized an estimated 200,000 troops and advanced into Vietnam along a broad front. The initial Chinese strategy aimed to quickly capture key border towns and inflict significant damage on Vietnamese infrastructure. Vietnam, despite being caught off guard by the scale of the Chinese invasion, mounted a determined defense. The Vietnamese People's Army, seasoned by decades of warfare against French and American forces, utilized guerrilla tactics, fortified positions, and the challenging terrain to slow the Chinese advance. Major battles occurred in the cities of Lang Son, Cao Bang, and Lao Cai, where fierce fighting resulted in heavy casualties on both sides. The war was characterized by its brutality and the significant loss of life. Both armies suffered substantial casualties, and there were widespread reports of atrocities committed against civilians. The Chinese forces faced logistical challenges and stiff resistance, which impeded their progress and led to high casualties. The Vietnamese forces, although defending their territory effectively, also suffered from the intense and relentless Chinese attacks. Despite achieving some initial successes, the Chinese advance stalled as they encountered more robust Vietnamese defenses and logistical difficulties. After capturing several border towns and inflicting considerable damage, China declared its objectives achieved and announced a withdrawal on March 5, 1979. The withdrawal was completed by March 16, 1979, bringing an end to the active phase of the conflict. The aftermath of the Sino-Vietnamese War left both countries claiming victory. China argued that it had successfully punished Vietnam for its actions in Cambodia and demonstrated its military might. Vietnam, on the other hand, claimed victory for having resisted the invasion and maintaining control of its territory. In reality, the war had no clear winner and resulted in significant losses and devastation for both sides. The war had several lasting impacts. For China, the conflict exposed weaknesses in its military capabilities and highlighted the need for modernization and reform within the People's Liberation Army. The experience led to significant changes in Chinese military strategy and doctrine in the subsequent years. For Vietnam, the war reinforced its reliance on the Soviet Union, deepening the Cold War division in Asia. The conflict strained Vietnam's resources and economy, already burdened by the long Vietnam War and subsequent conflicts in Cambodia. The war also solidified Vietnamese resolve to defend its sovereignty against larger neighbors, contributing to a sense of national pride and resilience. Regionally, the war had broader implications for Southeast Asian geopolitics. It intensified the rivalry between China and the Soviet Union in the region, with both powers seeking to expand their influence. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations (ASEAN) viewed the conflict with concern, as it underscored the volatility and potential for conflict in the region. Diplomatically, the Sino-Vietnamese War led to a prolonged period of hostility and tension between China and Vietnam. It took over a decade for the two countries to normalize relations, with formal diplomatic ties being restored in 1991. The legacy of the conflict continued to influence their interactions and regional policies for many years. In conclusion, The Sino-Vietnamese War of 1979 was a brief but intense conflict rooted in historical tensions, ideological differences, and immediate geopolitical disputes. The war had significant military, political, and diplomatic consequences for both China and Vietnam, as well as for the broader region. While the conflict did not result in a decisive victory for either side, it highlighted the complexities of international relations in a region marked by historical rivalries and competing interests. The legacy of the war continues to shape the dynamics between China and Vietnam, reflecting the enduring impact of this short yet significant episode in their shared history.